Welcome back to The Point. We're doing a special one-hour discussion on the developing constitutional crisis in Delhi. Mrs. Chandra, in part one, we talked about what I'm deliberately calling the confusion created by resolutions passed by the Assembly, comments made by the High Court, alleged defiance of the central government, whether it's justified or not. I want to come now to a second type of alleged defiance by the Delhi government of the central government, and that is the decision by the Delhi government to transfer 9 officers in defiance of the notification and in defiance of the alleged powers of the Lieutenant Governor. Is that a worse sort of defiance? Because it's not just a resolution in assembly. This time, it's a refusal to accept the authority of the Home Ministry.
Yes, it is open defiance, because now that this notification has come, and in any case even before the notification came, senior officers, IAS officers postings, I presume they're all IAS officers, these 9 people, used to go to the Lieutenant Governor. So 1, you have not followed what was the practice. 2, you have defied a new order which has come.
So it's a double defiance.
It's a double defiance, and what is more is, can you see the predicament in which the officers find themselves? Who issues that order? Who obeys that order? Are those transfer orders acceded to, or do they go back to the Lieutenant Governor to have one more situation like Anindo Majumdar, when the doors were locked and he was thrown out of his room?
Quite right. So in addition to what you nicely call a double defiance, you've also converted senior officers into a shuttlecock who are being knocked from side to side and left quite helpless in the process.
Yes, more than a shuttlecock. I mean, it's become hard-hitting.
Mr. Pillai, you've been Home Secretary. How do you think the Home Ministry should respond to what Mrs. Shailaja Chandra calls a double act of defiance?
See, my point, I think I agree with Shailaja Chandra in the sense that earlier postings of officers within the government, the prerogative of the Chief Minister, and the Chief Minister would send the proposal to the LG, and the LG by and large, unless there were very specific reasons for objecting to any particular proposal, would accept it. It is only the placement of the officers into the Delhi government that the Ministry of Home Affairs did as the cadre controlling authority, but I think the individual postings within were the discretion of the Chief Minister, and I think that is the position it should be, because the Chief Minister is the democratically elected head of the government.
You're giving me the background as you believe it used to be and as you think it should be. Now, in the present circumstances, where 9 officers have been posted in apparent defiance of the Home Ministry notification and in apparent defiance of the Lieutenant Governor who wasn't consulted, how should the Home Ministry respond to this specific situation? Answer that for me, sir.
I think you will have to initiate a dialogue with the Delhi government on the notification itself. I don't think you can allow this situation to come, because the officers in the field will have to obey the directions of the Chief Minister.
All right, that's a clear answer. In other words, the Home Ministry should look for a solution sitting across the table, an amicable solution, not respond to defiance with defiance. Mr. Tulsi, I want to bring you in here to ask you your opinion. Earlier, when we were talking about the Home Ministry notification and the fact that the Delhi Assembly has passed a resolution considering that notification unconstitutional, you thought the Delhi Assembly was completely right. It hasn't made any mistake. It hasn't erred. Now I'm talking about a slightly different situation. Now I'm talking about the decision of the Delhi government to transfer 9 officers in defiance of that notification and without consulting the LG. Do you believe the Delhi government was right to do so, or has it erred and has it acted defiantly, as Mrs. Chandra says?
I don't think the Delhi government is right in merely ignoring an order because the Legislative Assembly says that it's unconstitutional. There is an order which is unconstitutional, and the Constitution provides for a method of resolving these conflicts. The prerogative of interpretation of the Constitution is with the judiciary. So either of them, if the Delhi government wanted, they could have taken this dispute to the court and then sought an adjudication. But I don't think any authority can simply ignore the order passed by the central government or the central government to ignore the order passed by the state government. It's a responsibility of the Home Minister. If the judiciary is not involved, the Home Minister should resolve this or the Prime Minister should resolve this. But denial of democracy to the people of Delhi is just not correct.
But you said
it
something...
should not be denied even for a minute.
Absolutely, but you said something very important, Mr. Tulsi. You said that challenge the Home Ministry's notification in court. That is your prerogative. The courts have the right to adjudicate. But do not yourself, as the Delhi government, defy a Home Ministry resolution on your own. That is the nub of your position, Mr. Tulsi, isn't it?
That's correct. Absolutely correct.
Mr. Khaitan, please come in at that point. You've just heard a very senior Supreme Court advocate who in part one, I don't know if you could hear what he was saying, but in part one, he totally defended the right of the Assembly to pass the resolution it has. He said that resolution is not defiance. He agreed with you it was the will of the people. Now, on this different subject of posting 9 officers in defiance of the notification, he says you're acting wrongly. You want to challenge the notification, go to the courts and challenge it there. But don't just defy the Home Ministry's notification. How do you defend yourself?
In this case, there is a union government which is defying the constitutional scheme. And in our case, we are ignoring, overlooking the unconstitutional orders and acting as per the constitutional scheme. So I am first of all a little bemused by the choice of the word defiance. But having said that, this government will exhaust all the available remedies which are both legal and democratic in nature. What we are exercising right now are the democratic remedies.
Mr. Khaitan,
we have
can I make
a
small
special
point?
session of the House.
Mr. Khaitan, can I make a small point? You know, when you describe yourself as a government acting constitutionally, you become judge and jury in your case. This is a dispute over the constitutionality of the notification. You've suddenly decided that your view is the correct constitutional view. That's a determination a judge should come to. And that's why Mr. Tulsi says, wait for the courts to decide.
That's a very interesting...
decided yourself.
That's a very interesting point, Karan, that you have raised. And I wish you had raised similar arguments when the Honorable LG had issued orders calling the directions issued by the Chief Minister of Delhi void ab initio. And this is where ex-Solicitor General
that was on
India,
another day, several days ago. Let's not go back
unless you
there.
want me to respond in a particular manner.
No, I don't want you to respond in a particular manner. I don't want you to deflect.
What I want to say, LG called the orders issued by the Chief Minister void ab initio. This is the judicial term. No governor, no LG can issue orders calling the direction issued by the Chief Minister void ab initio. This is adjudication. So here you have an LG who has appropriated the powers of the judiciary,
take your point.
Sitting in judgment over the orders of the Chief Minister, calling them void ab initio,
today are doing
that
to the
can
Home
only be used by the judiciary.
I take your point. The LG did to you what you're doing to the Home Ministry, declaring something on your own judgment to be unconstitutional and wrong, and both of you possibly would acting as judge and jury in your own cases. I want to bring in Mr. Kohli at that point, because Mr. Kohli, what in fact the outcome looks like to the layman is not just defiance of the central government by the Delhi government, but something that's arguably worse. An attempt to embarrass the central government and an attempt to humiliate the central government. Ultimately, the Delhi government has put the authority of the central government at stake, and it's questioning it. Now, so far, your government in Delhi is silent. Do you intend to say something, or will silence be the only answer?
I have a few statements to make. Let's go one by one. On the term void ab initio, if the judiciary is the last bastion where the constitution is interpreted, so will we stop using the word constitution? Will we stop using terms like adjudicated? So there is no kind of limitation or a patent or a trademark that A or B has to use only these words. It's a democracy. Second is, let's go to democracy. Where does it flow from? It flows from the constitution. That's the basic 4 corners within which the democracy functions. It's not a mobocracy that can decide how every morning you can decide what you want to do. 3 is, Delhi is special. It can't be ignored. If the will of the people of Delhi, as Mr. Khaitan says, is important, can the will of people of India be removed? Because it is the capital of India. 4th, if Delhi Assembly tomorrow decides that for the will of the people of Delhi, it wants to eject the central government and remove Parliament House, everything, and say, no, go anywhere else you like, because that's the will of the people of Delhi, is that correct? So therefore, everything is always in the constitutional scheme, whether we like it, whether we don't like it. And as I pointed out, they have authority. I'm coming to it. They have authority to transfer thousands of people, barring IAS, IPS, Daniks and Danips. They don't have a state civil service. When they do, they can.
Come to my question now. This is an attempt to deliberately embarrass and humiliate the authority of the central government. Are you going to take it on the chin?
Well, let me answer that in one sentence. They have always been accuser, they are the prosecutor and judge in one. What they seek as humiliation or not, ultimately the constitution will prevail. And at least as far as we look at it, the constitution, when you bow to it, there is no humiliation, there is no victory. That is just how it's meant to be.
You're wonderfully, deliciously philosophical, and I applaud you on your restraint. But others would say, Mrs. Chandra, that this is developing towards, not necessarily reached, but it's developing towards a situation where arguably Mr. Rajnath Singh and Mr. Modi could say that this is constitutional defiance. These are grounds for dismissal for the Delhi government. Do you think we're getting there?
Well, if this kind of a situation persists, officers will not be able to work. Politicians, chief ministers, council of ministers have certain authority, but they do not have the authority or the knowledge to execute according to systems and processes, conventions and precedents which are only known to officers. If you don't have officers working, you're going to have bedlam. If there's bedlam, obviously there has to be a solution to overcome that bedlam, and I think the writing is on the wall the way things are going.
The writing is on the wall, and that writing would read, presumably, you could be dismissed if you carry on like this.
I think it will take a long time. I think there can still be room for some maneuver, some talking, some amicable solution, but failing that, something will have to be done. Delhi can't be run like this.
Mr. Pillai, I'm going to bring you in again at that point, because you're a former Home Secretary, and the decision, God forbid, if it were ever to be even considered, leave aside taken, would be taken by your successors and the Home Ministry. Now, you heard what Mr. Tulsi said. Earlier, he had defended the right and the legitimacy of the Delhi Assembly to pass a resolution calling the Home Ministry's notification unconstitutional. But now when we're talking about actually defying that notification and appointing officers in defiance of it, he's clearly said the Delhi Assembly was wrong. Do you think the situation, if it continues, is developing towards a point where Mr. Rajnath Singh could have legitimate grounds for saying, Mr. Kejriwal, I'm going to have to dismiss you?
Till very much down the road. I think after the Supreme Court judgments on imposition of President's rule and the criteria which has to be adopted for that, I think central governments are very wary of issuing a notification for imposing President's rule unless there are very, very compelling reasons. And I think in a democracy, you have the option of debate, and if you cannot resolve it, there's the option of going to the court, as Mr. Tulsi said. If the court either upholds the notification or strikes down the notification, and then you have another step into which you go. And subsequently to the court upholding the notification, if the government then continues to defy it, that I think would be a place where then government would start to seriously consider looking at, is there a breakdown of the constitution?
Now, Mr. Tulsi, the truth of the matter is that yesterday, an individual, Mr. Anand, has actually taken this issue of the notification to the Delhi High Court, and I believe his petition has been admitted. I believe a case will begin being heard. Undoubtedly, it's not going to get over in 24 hours. It's going to proceed for a while. So while that case is under the scrutiny of the Delhi High Court, what does propriety demand of the two parties, the Home Ministry and the Delhi government?
Well, both parties will ask for certain interim arrangement, and they will say that this is the past practice, at least that should be allowed to continue. That is status quo ante before this notification was issued. And that may be one of the solutions. The court will, of course, try to balance the equities between both sides, because The central government is trying to bleed the state government, make them dysfunctional, and make them more unpopular, prone to attack. But the question really is people's right to democracy. You can't deny democracy immediately after the elections, particularly when mandate is so large.
But that's a bigger, wider point. That's a bigger, wider point, and you're raising the argument that the Delhi government, through its notification, is denying democracy. The Delhi government would agree with you, the central government would not. So let's not get into that, because that's a bit of a side issue. Let's come back, Mr. Khaitan, to this issue of propriety that both sides need to maintain, and I'll come to you after that, Mr. Kohli. The issue of propriety that both sides need to maintain now that this specific notification is being looked at by the Delhi High Court. Are you prepared to maintain status quo ante? Which means, by the way, that you may have to be a little bit more willing to consult the governor on postings, because that's what status quo ante was, even if you believe it was wrong. Are you willing to observe that propriety?
I think the High Court order, 37-page order, which came out a day before yesterday, is absolutely crystal clear, demarcating the powers between the LG and the Chief Minister, and in the absence of any other adjudication, the mere possibility that something like this can be overturned by the Supreme Court, because Mr. Kohli, he was waxing eloquent on the mere possibility that Supreme High Court orders are known to be overturned and so on. So right now we have an order in our favor which says very clearly that barring 3 subjects, police, land and public order, in all other matters LG is supposed to act on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. I think that's the interim arrangement, which also Constitution envisages, and within that interim arrangement we should continue to function. And I as the spokesperson of this government, I can give you my reassurance that we are going to extend our utmost courtesy, utmost cooperation, both to the office of LG and to the central government and the Ministry of Home Affairs.
Those nice sweet words at the end of your sentence certainly was sugar-coating to what you began with, because when I asked you the specific question about observing propriety and going back to status quo ante, you cited the High Court order of 2 days ago to actually argue that you believe the High Court has already found on your side and there's no question of going back to status quo ante. So the sweet words at the end were just sugar-coating for the tough kick in the tummy that you delivered at the start. Mr. Dalil Kohli, you probably felt that kick in the tummy. It's your government that they are going to stand up against.
I didn't feel the kick.
You didn't feel the kick?
No, I didn't feel a kick in the tummy. I was actually a little amused about the courtesy they extended to Shakuntala Gamblin at a public rally. After all, she is a lady and a senior officer. And I've seen all the words they have used about the LG. They've always dragged in Mr. Modi as the Prime Minister. So if that is their standards of courtesy, we really can't argue with that. But they are a separate set of standards.
You're being deliciously polemical. You have a right to be. But come back to my question. They intend to continue to be defiant.
I reject the discussion on Article 356. Because 356 is an exceptional situation and there have to be enough reasons for it. You do not remove democratically elected governments even if there are differences. But there have to be exceptional conditions that are absolutely clearly unconstitutional, and therefore there is no other choice, almost like, if I may say, the rarest of rare cases as there are in the Indian Penal Code. So therefore 356, that it would be considered all, there should be no discussion on it. That's not how democracy functions.
Very quickly,
and my third part is that, look, the High Court order, which is what they are saying, sure, just one sentence, the High Court order, my understanding from what I've read in the papers, it's not quashing of the notification, it's on a bail plea. If tomorrow the Supreme Court comes with a contrarian view, you can't take it as a defeat of democracy.
Absolutely.
Because, one day we followed the High Court order and all. So therefore, you don't take these very hard positions. Let's see what happens.
Okay.
We have to ultimately
I'm stopping you there. I'm stopping you there, Mr. Kohli. That's a very long answer you've given and it's gone well beyond my original question to you. Literally in one sentence, Mr. Chandra, do you see things getting a lot worse before we see some improvement and some sense of harmony and calm? A quick answer.
I see things getting worse because there is a complete misunderstanding about the constitutional position on the side of the Aam Aadmi Party, and as far as the central government is concerned, the notification perhaps has been an overreach which has given them a handle to do what they're now doing.
All right, we have a very interesting couple of days ahead of us. Let's hope it doesn't go on beyond that. things getting worse before they get any better. My thanks to all my guests for joining me. Once again, my apologies to Mr. Khaitan for having accused him of coming late when in fact it was our equipment and our technical inability that delayed you. My apologies again. Goodbye. Good night.